Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have Katon De Pena here, lead singer of the band Hirax, legendary thrash metal band from the 80s. Katon, thank you for taking the time to do the podcast today. I got a lot of cool stuff I want to talk to you about because the main thing we're talking about besides the new stuff you got coming out is, one of your records is celebrating a 20-year anniversary, which is pretty rad. Um, so we're going to talk about the new age of terror, but before that, the thing that I kind of like to start with here, and I know your answer is going to be really interesting because you've been around the scene since the beginning. But I like to know like your personal heavy metal history. You know, those bands and records that you remember listening to that kind of like got you into the scene and wanted you to start making that kind of music.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, with everybody, especially if you're into heavy music, it's very personal because you either grew up on it or it was introduced to you from a brother or a father or you're a family member, even sisters, because it goes across everybody. Like doesn't matter if you're male or female.
Hmm.
Uh, Music just it's an international language. It speaks to everyone. But so I grew up with five other siblings, so there was always a lot of music around the house. My father was in the Navy for 30 years, so he traveled all around the world, and he would bring
Wow.
instruments back home from like Japan and Germany and stuff. He brought home violins and guitars and stuff. So there was always some music in the house. And my parents listened to a lot of different stuff. My dad was into opera music and classical music. My mother was more into like poppy dance, 60s and 70s stuff, and stuff like the girl bands of the 60s, the Ronettes, the Supremes, and stuff. But what really happened was my oldest brother, he was into Hendrix and stuff like that, and the Cream, and even Bob Dylan, stuff like that. So I heard early hard rock music as a young kid, and then my sisters were into everything, so they listened to stuff like David Bowie. But what
Ooh,
really
nice.
happened is after the Hendrix introduction, I got a hold of stuff like Sabbath. Sabbath was one of the earliest bands I got into, and then it got more into like a lot of the British bands as well as American bands because there was a band called Montrose that I loved a lot, and but obviously Thin Lizzy, and then that
Ooh,
bands like
love
Judas
Thin Lizzy.
Priest and all that early 70s stuff. And then it got, the 80s was when it really blew up. So that was like the British new wave of heavy metal. And there
Yeah.
were a lot of other bands, though. We weren't just listening, me and my friends, especially growing up in the neighborhood, we started listening to everything we could get our hands on. So it was bands from the UK like Diamond Head, and then there were bands from Spain. There was a band called Baron Rojo, and
Yeah.
we just anything we could get our hands on. Even the Japanese explosion bands like Loudness. There was another band called Anthem, another band called Bow Wow, and a band called Earthshaker. So we basically sponged on all kinds of whatever was heavy. We sponged on it, and then I remember, obviously Motorhead,
Mm.
and when we first got the Venom records, the first two Venom records, that pretty much was like the big explosion, and everything after that, it just had to be heavier and heavier. So those are like my earliest stuff, but like, yeah, bands like, obviously back to the early 70s stuff, Hendrix, the Cream, and then obviously Sabbath, then Lizzy, and then the explosion with bands like Venom and Iron Maiden and Motorhead. That was just what made me just get even more into it. And then what happened is in the early 80s there was a tape trading scene where we were all tape trading,
Yeah.
and that was when the demos really obviously the No Life Till Leather, bands like Overkill on the East Coast, they had demo tapes, and then there were bands in Germany like Destruction and Sodom and Creator. Creator wasn't even called Creator yet, and we had demos of them. And there was a band called Bathory, and a band that I really became good friends with was called Hellhammer, and they were from Switzerland.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
that's
know
pretty much,
Hellhammer.
yeah, those are pretty much my early beginnings when we finally got to the beginning of the thrash metal thing. But I'm a 70s, 80s heavy metal hard rock guy.
Yeah.
And then up to date now, I listen to still a lot of heavy stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I was gonna. It's cool you touched on that because I was gonna ask like how much were you involved with like the tape trading scene back then? Because I know it was huge. I mean
Oh
that
yeah.
was like one of the main ways to find new bands and get new music back then.
Yeah,
Um,
it was like it basically, even though it wasn't the internet, it was the internet of music for us. Tape trading, you could trade with anybody all over the world, and that's exactly what was going on. And
wow.
Metallica kind of helped spearhead it because their demo was so popular. And back then, that's how we got music was demo tapes. I mean, there were record stores, and you got like imports. We would
Mhm.
go and get the new, Diamond had singles. They and Iron Maiden had singles, and then the albums and stuff. But the demos were like when you were really into it, like that spearheaded the whole thrash metal scene. If it wasn't for the demo tapes, the thrash metal scene would have never grown like it did. And so, yeah, I was there from the beginning. Like, I mean, obviously in our area, there were us. Hirax was around, Metallica was around, Slayer was around, Dark
Yeah.
Angel was around, and there was another band called Agent Steel. And
Yeah.
so that was kind of like the explosion out of the LA scene. And obviously there was the Bay Area scene because we're not that far away from each other. I mean, San Francisco by car is maybe 8 hours. If
Yep.
you're speeding, it's 6 hours, but up in the Bay, Exodus was up there, Testament was starting out. They were called Legacy. There was a band called Death Angel,
Mhm.
Possessed. So there were a lot of bands up there already. And then, with the combination of the LA scene, California was on fire, literally.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to me, like thinking about the amount of bands that came out of California back then. I mean, I've been lucky enough to funny like live in the Bay Area and down south in California for a while, and just getting to go like visit those places that those bands played in the early days was awesome. Seeing like
Yeah.
where everything kind of started in the Bay Area and stuff like that.
It's pretty insane to think of what did come out of California. I mean, there's a lot of other great areas. Texas had a lot of good metal.
Yeah.
New York, obviously, whenever you have a big hub, like that's I think where we have something in common with the East Coast
Hmm.
versus the West Coast. There's a lot of bands in those areas. So between the East Coast and the West Coast, New York versus LA, San Francisco, that's a big part of the heavy thrash metal scene. And there's other places, but those are kind of like the strongholds when you look at the United States. I mean, Florida was great. A lot of bands came out of Florida, Death,
Yep.
Nasty Savage, and then a little bit later on, bands like Obituary and let me think real quick, Cannibal Corpse.
Yep.
Those are some great bands. So in America, it was definitely exploding. I mean, I'm kind of going through a little bit of the genre and the scene, but you
Sure.
know, beginning and we're still standing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with this next. Being so entrenched in that scene in the early days, I'm sure you've talked about this with, over the course of, being a band, but like can you take me through like those beginning days of Hyrax and like how you met the members and the band started and going into recording that first record for Metal Blade?
Yeah. What was great about it, like, we were still in school. Like we were still in like even
Yeah,
from junior high to high school. And I think that's what's great about metal music in general, no matter what genre it is, because it's all really under the same banner, like
I agree.
heavy metal, what and all the other genres that there are, and there's always something new being made. But when you look at thrash metal, black metal, death metal, grindcore, punk crossover, all that stuff, and there's more. But the thing that's great about all of that is we kind of bond together through being whether if I'm not trying to be a hipster saying this, but outcast. A lot of us are outcast, or we just felt that we were different, and we were proud of that. But when you find another person that has that in common with you, and that's what you'll see with the metal audience, we bond together and we become like family, and you go to shows and you'll see people that you've seen, and you either become friends or you'll just keep seeing them for years, and then sooner or later you'll become friends because you have something in common. You love the music. But for us starting out, it was basically that. Like there was another guy named Johnny Tabaris. I became a friend with him in junior high. We started playing in bands. That was really the beginning of Hyrax, even though we went through
Mhm.
different names in the beginning. Johnny was a childhood friend. We both listened to a lot of different heavy shit and also punk. Like we were before it was even cool to do that because back in the day people used to fight. They hated each other. Punks and
Yeah.
metalers didn't get along. But me and Johnny were listening to the Ramones. We were listening to the Dead Boys, Black Flag, Minor Threat, all that stuff. And this was really early, so it was almost like you didn't even want to tell people you listen to that stuff because that's how divided it really was. Like nowadays, it's a lot more common and way cooler to be able to listen to all of these genres of music, but there used to be a time when it wasn't like that. And that's when we came up. So early 80s, and then we met some other guys and we just started talking about what direction we wanted to go in with the music. That was really important. There was a thing back in those days called "Don't be a poser, no posers."
Yeah.
So that was really now it's kind of a laugh, but back then that was actually serious. And like
Oh yeah.
you either played from the heart or you were a poser. So we wanted to go more towards the heavier stuff. We even though we were down in LA, we were totally against the whole hair metal thing and all the what are they call it hair metal and poser metal, whatever you want to call it. But we were the opposite of that. We weren't pretty. We wore denim and leather at the most, high top sneakers, and so yeah, we found like-minded people, and we became really tight with each other, and that's when the scenes started happening. You know, there were other bands starting to pop up too. So like I said, back in LA at that time, you had Dark Angel. They were kind of like our brother band. Like us and them would either play together. We were all competition, whether we liked it or not. You know, we were all trying
Yeah.
to outdo each other. Their Slayer was already starting to really go places, and Metallica it started out in LA, but then they moved to San Francisco, and then we all figured out that San Francisco was a great place to go because they were way more accepting of our music, and there were clubs up there that would put up with thrash metal audiences because LA was there was no stage diving, there were no circle pits, the bouncers and stuff would throw kids out for
Jeez.
doing that stuff. Like now it's totally normal, but back then
Yeah.
if you stage dove, you got kicked out of the show. So that was like the early beginnings, just meeting up with other like-minded musicians, and we weren't even musicians at that point. We were just learning how to play our instruments, but we all had passion and we would work really hard, you know, flyering. Like now that's not really a common thing, but we flyered, we take flyers out to schools. I mean, we were like commandos. We would go at nighttime, flyer the lockers. We would stick flyers in the lockers. This is also when you could still walk on campus. This is before gates were put up to lock out people from going on campuses. So we used to commando advertise our shows, and it was amazing because we were so young. Like we were in our early 20s, late teens doing this, and we were already packing clubs. There was like 300 people showing up to shows, especially if us and Dark Angel played together, there would easily be 300 people, and it'd be crazy as hell. I remember one of our earliest shows of us playing together. Chuck from Death had flown out from Florida just to
Oh
see us,
wow.
you know, and this was before he was really starting to happen. Like, he was a big fan of both bands, and I think that's another thing that I need to mention is that that's how tight it was. Like you wanted to go see bands that you never could get to see. But Chuck was so dedicated. That's one of my fondest memories about Chuck from Death is that that kid was so dedicated. He did whatever it took. And that's why now I'm not surprised in his popularity and that he's a legend because he
Yeah.
worked really hard. But that was basically just the way we were. Like when you're young, you know, sky's the limit and you don't really think about any restrictions, and that was what was great. I think that's the fuel behind the whole beginning of the thrash metal explosion was that there were no limitations at all.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, like having that ground floor advantage of like this new thing is like rising in popularity and like having that much passion of like, oh, this is what we want to do. We want to be a part of this and like changing the face of music, so to
Yeah,
speak. Because like that, yeah, like thrash was like so huge in the 80s and I mean I wasn't around for it, but I am aware of like the division of like hair metal and thrash metal and all that. And it was I've read about like fights between bands and
yeah.
stuff like that.
It
It would
was
get
it was it was
nuts.
fierce. It was fierce and scary at the same time, but also very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine, man. Like and again, like you're saying, you guys are kids, so it's just like having the time of your life and being a part of something that meant a lot to you and still means a lot to you even to
Yeah.
this day. And
Yeah, I mean, I would have never thought there would be books and movies. Like for me, it's still mind blowing to see all these movie documentaries and books. Like, so for me, I feel honored to be a part of it. I really do, and I know how lucky I am because I mean, I was there, and it was like breathtaking to see some of these shows. Like the first time we played in the Bay Area, it was Hirax, Megadeth, Exodus, and Death Angel was the opening band.
wow.
Actually, it was actually the opening band was Testament, and they were still called Legacy. And they had their singer at that time was Zetro, who's now in
Okay.
Exodus. And at that time, Paul Bailoff was the front man for Exodus. And that show was literally where the club looked like it was going to explode. There were so many people in the venue, especially having that bill. I mean, obviously today, if you had that same bill, it'd be insane. But
Yeah.
back then, it was like the club was going to explode, like implode, the walls were going to fall in, and the whole place was sweat. Like there was sweat dripping from the ceiling. That's how crazy it was. But that was when I realized we definitely got something here. We've got a great movement, a great scene, and there it just took off from there.
Something else I wanted to kind of touch on too with the band is like every band kind of had to have a little bit of a shtick, so to speak, in the early days. And I
Yeah,
really like the outfits you guys used to wear. It reminds me of like a John Carpenter movie, like straight out of Escape from New York or something like that. Was
totally.
that like a choice? Like, is that what you
Yeah,
guys were kind
yeah,
of going
and
for?
and you're right about that. Anything like Escape from New York or The Warriors, we love those
Yeah.
movies. I don't think that we actually did it totally on purpose, though. I mean, I think it was just in the back of our minds. Uh, we could relate to that, like we
Yeah.
were street bands, a lot of us, and it still goes on to this day. Like, when we play shows, and especially in Los Angeles, well, not just Los Angeles, around the world, when we show up, especially early, you'll see a lot of kids in the parking lot dressed the same way. And this was a very common thing back in the day, and it still goes on. Kids drinking in the parking lot,
Yeah.
cranking their music by their cars, which is beautiful to me. Like whenever I see it, I'm like, it still lives. That there's that human spirit where you get pumped up before the show. You're hanging out in your car, cranking the records and getting ready for the show. Everybody has a different ritual, but it's pretty similar. And
Oh yeah.
so yeah, we dressed like that. I don't think it was totally where we totally thought about those movies, but they're definitely in the back of our mind. And we did love those movies. Like everybody that's an old school thrash metal person can either recite lines from those movies, especially the Warriors movie. I mean, who
Yeah.
doesn't know Warriors come out to play?
Oh man.
So yeah, it's definitely a part of it. But I think it was also that we knew it made us look a bit different than the hair metal bands, even though they started dressing similar, except
Mhm.
for they posed it up a little bit more with bandanas and stuff like that, and the band. Also, even though it did start out like if you look at early pictures of Metallica and a lot of the bands, they were wearing a little bit of that spandex stuff, but they got ditched pretty quick.
Yep.
After a while, you just saw more jeans and high tops. But in the beginning, there was a lot of that. And but I think it was a real thing that where we wanted to separate ourselves from the hair metal bands. So we dressed a lot more like gangs, and we looked more like the Escape from New York versus like the Warriors.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because I mean, it looks unique. It doesn't look like every other band out
Yeah,
there
and
that's like trying
when you
to.
see that, it's a thrash metal show. When you
Yeah.
show a heavy metal show, when you show up and you see lines of kids like that, you're like, wow, this is awesome. And the girls that show up to shows are just as badass. So it's like there's really no gender thing there. It's like everybody can relate to that dress code.
Yeah. Yep. That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
So, I guess to jump ahead a little bit here. So, in between that first record coming out, or yeah, you had two records coming out, and then Metal Blade did kind of like a compilation of both those records. And then
yeah,
there was a pretty extensive hiatus from like
yeah.
86 to about 2003. So what kind of happened in between that period of time before you were like, "Hey, let's do this again. Let's get the band going
Yeah.
again."
Well, I can tell you this for any upcoming young musician, it's navigating the music business
Yeah.
is like a minefield. It really is. And also, if you're not prepared for it, which we weren't, like none of us knew that this was going to become a business. And it would have probably scared the hell out of us if we would have known. But we were so fearless, we just kept going. But what happens is it becomes a business. You start realizing that it takes gas money to get the shows. It takes money to, even for the venue, they've got to have people working the door and the sound system and all that stuff. So you start finding out more about the business. For me, that was probably the hardest transition. Like, and also the band starts making some money, and those things have got to be divided, and it's just a lot, especially
Yeah.
if you're say 21, and then your band starts packing venues, and then you realize there's promoters and there's the club owners and there's all this business stuff that goes into it. But for me, it got frustrating. It was a little scary. The band was also back then we partied a lot. Like, look, I'm
Yeah.
being really, really honest with you. People don't always tell the truth about this shit, but a lot of partying, and I look at it differently now just because I know that was a bad effect on us. Like you think a lot more clearly when you're sober. I'm not trying to promote sobriety versus not being. I think everybody's got to
Sure.
pick their lane. If they party, party. If they don't. But it does affect how you think, how you react to each other as band members, because if you're not on the same page, that's when you start seeing bands break up and not get along. And that's what was going on with us, besides partying, the
Yeah.
business aspect of it. So we basically broke up just because we weren't really getting along. That's the fact of the matter. We weren't getting along. And that happened to a lot of bands. I mean,
Yeah.
if you even look back, a lot of bands break up, or they're gone forever, or they break up and they get back together once everybody's kind of gotten their shit together, or maybe some of the guys stop partying. I mean, that's something really to think about for young musicians. I do understand because we did it. We
Hmm.
partied our asses off. But, and some bands can handle it. Not all bands can handle it. Some guys get along better. Some are really family. But even with families, I mean, look at a band like, I'm not saying they had the same problems, but Sepultura is a prime example of
Yeah.
an entity splitting up, and their stuff's well documented, all the crazy stuff that's gone on with those two different camps over the years. I love both sides because I respect them and I know them and they're good people. But sometimes good people can't get along, and that happened with us. It happened with a lot of bands. But once the ship got righted, and for us it took 13 years, but it was also because of my wife, who was back then, she was my girlfriend. She found a
Hmm.
box full of letters,
Hmm.
and I'm talking old school snail mail,
Oh
in my
wow.
closet. When we first got together, she was helping me clean out my house, and she found a box, and she's like, "What is this?" And I loved my wife, and I still do,
Yeah.
but she didn't know I was in a band, which was the main reason
Wow.
I really liked her, because she didn't care and didn't know that I was in a band, and to me that was awesome. But when she found the letter, she goes, "Why aren't you doing this?" And I'm like, "Because that's a long time ago." She's like, first thing she says, she's like, "Do you have music?" And I go, "Yeah." And it's like, it's so cool when somebody doesn't know shit about you like that. And I gave her the music, and she's like, "Well, why don't we at least burn these?" This is like in the beginning when the internet was starting to really rise.
Yeah.
And she's all, "I'm gonna make a page and put these CDs on the page, and see how they do." Well, they did really well. She burned every copy. She burned like 5,000 copies,
Wow.
and she sold all of them. And I was like in
Wow. That's
shock.
insane for back then.
Yeah,
That's a good
burning,
number.
and we're not talking fast burning system. She would burn through the night. So, anyways, that's when we realized we should start doing the music again. I originally reached out to the original band members, but their lives had changed so much. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing I will bring up, is that sometimes musicians just their lives change. And so some of them couldn't even come back. We started out where some of them tried, but it's just like they either got married, had houses, had children, and that just changes the whole thing. For me, I've dedicated my whole life to this. So, I mean, I'm available to do the touring, to get up and do the interviews. I mean, even in the last 2 weeks, I've had an interview every day,
Wow.
where, yeah, it's like
You're
really
going for
things
it.
are going crazier more than I thought they would. But I'm happy with it and I'm good with it. But you really have to put your life if you're going to decide to do this, it's got to be a priority or don't do it because I mean, it's not typical. Like a lot of musicians think you sleep all day. Well, no, that don't happen
Hmm.
no more. Like I'm either up in the morning on the phone with Europe. Right now we're getting ready to go to back to Europe. We'll be there in August. Tour starts August 1st. So I'm still going over logistics, going over the merchandising for every show because we're doing like 18 shows, somewhere 15 to 18 shows,
Yeah.
maybe 2 days off. Like we don't even have much time to rest, but we're doing this tour 3 weeks. So you got to factor in how many shirts you need per show, logistics, gas. And another thing that people don't think about, there's
Yep.
toll roads in Europe. So you have to pay a toll when you're going into a different country. So all this stuff. And so it's not really a job where you can just slack off. You really got to stay on top of stuff, uh, answering all the different social networking because that's insane now too. Because
Yeah, it is.
everybody's got a favorite too. So it's like either you love Instagram or you love Facebook. So you're answering messages on all that, even TikTok and Bandcamp. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
But I'm up for it. Luckily, I've got a lot more focus. Because if I was doing this back in the '80s, I don't think I could have handled all this. The social networking sites taken enough as it is. Besides going to band rehearsal, and planning out sets and live shows and all that stuff. And then now with the addition of the new album, so my
Mhm.
plate's really full. But I'll be honest with you, I'm very happy about it. I'd rather be busy than not, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of work. So, anyways, to answer your question, I went a little long there,
No,
but
no, no. Cool, man.
basically we were gone for 13 years, and I was actually learning about the business. Like I started working at record labels. I worked in record stores, which was actually the best lesson I could have ever taken. Like I would highly suggest, and I know there's a lot of musicians and people in the music scene that do work at record stores. You can
Yep.
learn a lot by working at record stores. You can learn about distribution, and I learned about that. I learned about record labels and who's really good and who's not. You learn about, especially for our style of music, I want to work with people that are humble and also really care about the music and put a lot of love into it because our fans and anybody that's in the metal they really pay attention to the records, they pay attention to the layouts, the covers, the album covers, the lyric sheets. So that's really important to us, and those are the kind of people we work with. Like we don't just choose any label, we really look at the labels that we work with because we want the product to get out to the fans correctly. And I also know our market. Like we're not
Yeah.
Whitesnake, we're not Def Leppard, even though those bands are great for what they do. We're an underground metal band, and we always need to remember that.
Yeah, and I think having that freedom to be able to take the time and choose like that is smart too, because you don't want
Yeah,
to
like I
rush into
said,
something.
yeah, and it does help, like I said, to work at those stores, like all those independent record stores, man, they matter, and
Mhm.
they're the ones who order the hard to find records, whether it's Hirax or say it's Dark Throne or whatever band. There's a band that we played with recently called Suitor, and no, they're from Norway. And if you
Oh
haven't
yeah,
heard
yeah,
of
I know
Suitor,
them. Yeah.
yeah, they're an amazing band, but they're one of those bands that really cares about their image and their product. And we had the pleasure of actually we got picked up at the airport at the same time when we were doing a festival, and we got to know each other, and it was just really great to have such a different style of band and our style get along and talk about music. But like
Yeah.
the bottom line is you got to care about the product, you got to care about the fans. And so I learned about that from working in the record stores, and then that was kind of like when I met my wife, the timing was great. And it made me ready to go back into the music because the music, if you're not ready for this, you shouldn't really get into it because it's a lot. Especially if you're running the band, and I've been running the band for over 40 years now. You got to really know
Yeah.
what you're doing, or it can be frustrating, is what I'm trying to tell you. A lot of musicians get frustrated. It's not as easy as everybody thinks getting your music out there, even getting your music heard, because there's a lot of great bands. Like the sad thing is there are bands that are somewhere sitting in a garage right now putting out great music, but not everybody's heard it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the internet helped that a little bit when it kind of came around, like people rediscovering bands and you know that connectivity, but like you mentioned, the social media aspect of it is so much work
It's
for a band.
overwhelming.
It's a lot, man. Yeah,
It's
I
a
hate
lot.
doing it for this. It's like,
Yeah, even if you just look at your Instagram, it's fucking insane, man. And then it's worldwide, so you're dealing with, like I said, different time zones. We deal with Brazil, we deal with Argentina, South America, Europe, Japan. These are all different time zones. Australia. So you got to be up for it. You got to love it. I think the thing that's great that I'm sure me and you have this totally in common. We love this shit, or we wouldn't be doing it.
yeah, yeah. No, I care about the history of the genre. It's like the most fascinating thing to me. So it's like putting the work into it is
Well,
nothing.
that's awesome, and it's what's great is that you're one of those people that's preserving it because a lot of it
Yeah,
would be lost. Like even for us, if I wouldn't have gotten back into it, a lot of the Hirax history would have been lost.
man.
And so I've been able to over the years get it back. Fanzines, some of those fanzines are so important to the history of the metal because a lot of it where they had photos in those fanzines that the
Yeah,
bands don't even have anymore. There's pictures that I see in fanzines. Some of them I don't even remember being taken. I remember there was a photo of me and Tom G. Warrior from Celtic Frost that me and him both don't even recall taking together, but we did take it together. So when fanzines are found again, because there are people that have these things in their attics and in their
yeah.
back closets, but they're holding on to history, and hopefully those things will be found because when they surface, people love seeing these things. Like it's really cool to see the history unfold. And so like I said, for you, thankfully, there's guys like you that are documenting it, and it's going to be to where newer generations get to find out about this music.
So, speaking of Celtic Frost, is it true that he made the logo for the band?
Yeah, Tom's awesome.
Oh, wow.
It's funny because in the early days, like I said, I mean, he was always really smart. Like I've
Yeah,
known him since at least 83, 84, right around there. And Tom was always a really smart underground dude, even though he's bigger now than ever. But dude, the guy still has that underground ethic. He does everything himself. He writes his own stuff. He basically the guy could be a writer. Like he could write
yeah.
for a big time, either magazine or newspaper, something huge he could do. He's an artist, he's creative, and he's a really good person. Like once he's your friend, he's a real friend. And I've known him for decades now. And when we first started out, we had a different logo, and he got the demo tape because we were trading Hellhammer tapes and Hyrax
Okay.
tapes. I mean, I've been into it. Like not just a musician, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I love the music. Like I remember getting the first Destruction demo tape, and I wrote to them, and you're the first guy that wrote to us from the United States. I mean, I've known those guys, a
Wow.
lot of those bands, and when I see them today, it's just like seeing really old friends that I've known for decades. But back to Tom, he got our demo tape, the first 4-track Hyrax demo tape, and he loved it, but he hated the demo. He even wrote back and he's like, I don't like he goes, I don't like the logo. That's what he said. He loved the tape, he loved the songs, but he didn't like the logo. So he goes, do you mind if I draw you a new logo? And I wrote, this is back when it would take 2 weeks. So I wrote back 2 weeks later, and I said, dude, whatever you want to do, because I'd seen a lot of his artwork from Hellhammer, and his
Yeah.
artwork from Hellhammer is amazing. So he wrote back and he goes, well, I'm changing the band's name from Hellhammer to Celtic Frost. And I drew a Celtic Frost logo and I drew a Hyrax logo, and he sent me both. And I was like, holy shit, this is great. And if you really look at the Celtic Frost logo and you look at the Hyrax logo from back, like from the Morbid Tales record,
Yeah.
there's a similarity. You just have to look at them and you go, whoa, the points on the logo, the certain curves, they are very similar. A lot of people, once they realize that and they look at it, they go, holy shit, Tom G. Warrior really did design the logo. But yeah, he did that mainly because he didn't like our first logo. And we've been using the logo ever since. And he's always a good guy. And when I see him, once in a while, I'll see him when they come through the United States. And I'll probably see him in Europe on tour myself again. In fact, we're playing with, yeah, his band. I guess it's the Hellhammer tribute band that he has.
Oh,
I
cool.
think, what do they call, Triumph of Death? Yeah, we're playing with him at one of the festivals coming up. But whenever I see him, it's still great, and he still jokes around with me about the logo and stuff. So I have nothing but respect for him, and he's always been a great guy. And I'm still a big fan of his music. Like he's
Yeah,
one of those guys that just stays true to what he does. He knows his lane, and he's really good at staying in it.
man, that's so awesome. Just knowing that like how close everybody was back then, and like bands were like very like supportive of each other in that way. Because
Yeah, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. We were all also competitive. I mean, but I think
sure,
that's what made it great, because you wanted
yeah,
to do good. Because if you saw another band doing good and writing great songs, like for us, we fed off of each other, really. Like
hmm
if Hellhammer sent us or Celtic Frost sent us a great demo, then we were like, we need to go to make a great demo. Tom would also send me rehearsal tapes. Like I still have a rehearsal tape sitting over here on my console of Celtic Frost rehearsals, and then I would send him a
wow,
Hirax rehearsal. So yeah, we were that not just competitive but also supportive. Like there's pictures of me from that 1984 and 85 wearing Celtic Frost shirts, and that was before they were massively produced. He would send them to me from Switzerland, and I would wear them. So yeah, we've always been very supportive, but I have nothing but mad respect for Tom. He's a great guy.
that's so awesome. Yeah, it's cool to get that confirmation on that. Because I read it a couple places, but I wasn't 100% sure if that was like,
Yeah, it's
uh,
it's
yeah,
totally true, and people still are like they're blown away by it. But I get it, man, because it does. It's like, but he was always a hardworking dude. This guy could be
yeah,
doing a bunch of bands, and then he'd also be a fan of a band and like make us a logo. Like it's just amazing. And he's still, I mean, one of the things I love about him, he's still like that. He's still
hmm
a supportive friend. He's still really cool. He was actually one of the guys, even though we picked, we ended up with a different producer. We actually were thinking about having him produce the new album because that's
oh
how
yeah.
much I love the guy, and I also appreciate and respect and trust him enough to do something like that. He's the real deal. Like it doesn't matter. There's a lot of musicians out there, but Tom is one of the best and one of the realest out of all of them.
So going back to the album that we were discussing, when your wife, kind of like we're like, hey man, get the band going again.
Yeah.
You mentioned members couldn't come back. So how did you meet the lineup that you would get for that record?
Well, luckily, I live in Los Angeles, so there's a plethora of musicians all over the
Yep.
place. There's another place close to us called Orange County.
hmm
And a lot of people don't give Orange County credit enough, but even, certain members of Slayer came out of there. Jeff Hanneman was pretty known for, the Orange County area. Same with Dave Mustaine. He
Yep.
used to live in Huntington Beach, which is a very popular area out here. So there's from Orange County to Los Angeles, tons of musicians. There's even an area called the Valley out
hmm
here. A lot of musicians there. I mean, it's insane. So I luckily I went to the Whiskey A Go Go, which is a pretty known venue, and I
Yep.
would see bands play, and you kind of could go see four bands a night and just kind of watch the bands. And I wasn't trying to steal anybody. That's not never my objective. But if I see a musician that's not happy, or you can tell the band's not really doing much, maybe it's just a hobby. So I ended up talking to a few guys, and we just started talking, and I invited them to start playing together, and some of it worked. It doesn't always work, but you got to try. I think that's the main thing with me is that I never give up. Like even though we've still gone through band member changes, for
Yeah.
me Hyrax is my baby. So and I think people respect that now because they realize I'm keeping it going no matter what because I've done it for so long and it's a big part of me. And also it's almost like I couldn't get out. It's like a gang that I can't get out of anyways. The fans are amazing. I mean, that's the bottom line. I really do it because of the fans and that they've been even more supportive in the last even 10 years. The fan base has continually grown. So, and now it seems like it's at a fever pitch. Like I said, I'm busy more than I ever have been. And even just trying to get the new record done, it's an important feat. We're almost there. We're like probably five more songs to be mixed and then the record's finally done. But like I said, we're doing things to kind of give people a taster. That's why there's that EP coming out.
Yeah.
But I also, when I go back to the history of Hyrax, from the first album, like when my wife found the first and second album, those records also become a part of people's lives. Like it's really amazing
hmm
what music can do. It like either they were going through their adolescence are going through a hard time in their life, and these records help them get through that. I mean, I hear that all the time when we do concerts and people come to get records signed. They'll tell me what the record means to them, and that's another thing that like really hits me in the heart. Like I'm like, I gotta keep going when you have people telling you these stories. I mean, even recently we had a soldier in Ukraine on the front lines during the battle. When he would have time, he would be writing to us,
Wow.
and he'd say that the first album they actually are listening to that in the barracks underground. You know, so when you hear these kind of stories, like it becomes even more real to you. Like I am beside myself when I hear that kind of stuff. That there's soldiers that are on the, they could be, you know, they're so close to death, yet they're using our music to kind of uplift themselves.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the song like lyrics is about war, and
Yeah,
like all the evils that come with it. So it's I can see why that they're like gravitating towards it because they're going through it, and
yeah,
it's
you
that
know,
like
and for me, it's also because also I grew up around that. My dad was a soldier, so that might be
yeah,
also just implemented in my skull cap.
yeah,
Of you know, like a lot of I like a lot of history, even the stuff that people don't want to talk about. To me, all that history is important. I mean, nothing, not everything's pretty. You know what I mean?
mm,
And obviously, the last 4 years, 5 years of our lives have been uprooted by a lot of crazy shit. So I think you got to kind of, it's almost like therapy. If you don't talk about it, you're going to explode, you know? And for me, during the pandemic, a lot of even the new record was written just because it's basically therapy to get
yeah.
through being on lockdown and all this other crazy shit that we dealt with. But I mean, I love that the music can also uplift everybody, and that's a very important part to me. I always think of that, like every record that we do, you know, even going back to the New Age of Terror, those records were really important, and people have let me know that. So that's why I'm still doing all this stuff.
Yeah, so that record came out in a very in metal history, so to speak. Thrash wasn't really as big as it was in the mid to early 2000s.
Yeah.
How did that kind of affect things like going into like wanting to do a new album, being like we're a thrash metal band from the 80s, like,
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
have like metalcore blowing up and deathcore and all that stuff coming up.
Well, I'll tell you, man, this is one of the best interviews I've done in a while because you're asking very important questions. And it's also
Thank you.
it's a well, yeah, I mean, seriously, and I do a lot of interviews and a lot of them are just the same old shit. But this question is great because you're right. It came out at a time when there was all this other stuff going on and there was really no focus on thrash metal.
Yeah.
I have always been like, well, hey, we're gonna still do it our way, you know. To me, that's really important, and I do know that the fans care about that. And the
Yeah.
good thing is we did it, and it actually ended up paying off. But it was kind of a scary time because we're like, is anybody really gonna care? But we're like, well, let's make this record for ourselves, and then if people like it, great. And it started to really pick up, and we noticed that there was also like the scrapings of a beginning of a revolution, like with thrash metal again. We didn't
Yeah.
really plan it that way, but we started seeing a lot of new younger bands,
Mhm.
and we started seeing fanzines and stuff where they were mentioning us too, like they were saying, you know, the forefathers, but also there's these new bands, and I think that's I got to give credit to a lot of the new bands because they helped stir it up again. You know, bands like Municipal Waste. There's a
Yep.
band called Toxic Holocaust. There's a band from Brazil called Violator,
Oh,
and
hell yeah, I love that band.
yeah, they're great. And they opened up for us in Japan. That's when I really got to look at them, and I said, "These guys are good, man. It's good to see that there's
Yeah.
some fresh blood, you know." And then there was a band that came out from Ireland called Gamma Bomb, and they were playing by my house, and they actually asked me to come out to the show, and I went, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like I thought it was also great that they reached out to me, like they're looking up this old thrash metal dude to say, hey, you know, that you're part of our history. Would you like to come out and see us? And I was like, sure. So I went and saw them on a band called
Yeah.
Eval. I think they're from England. And so that was kind of when I got like a hunch that like there's something happening again. And then it just started to be that way. Like we started doing more shows, and there were local bands coming up at the time that we had opening for us. There was a band called Fueled by Fire, another band called Warbringer, and this is when
Yeah.
they were just starting, but they'd be opening the shows, and I was like, the kids are starting to show up again. There's a lot more denim jackets and vests coming out to the shows with all these patches on it from the old days. And it just kept growing, and it's been doing that. That's what's kind of weird. It definitely is back. I mean, you still have all the other genres like death
Hmm.
metal and black metal and grindcore and all that stuff still very happening, but definitely thrash metal's right there again, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. It really is amazing to see. I mean, even the record labels, like labels that we started out with, are interested in the music again. Like with us, we still hear from Metal Blade Records, which is amazing because that's the label we started out with, even though we're not with them, but we're still kind of like with each other. It's
Yeah.
they still help distribute records. You know, they're still involved in the first two records that have been reissued. You know, it's great to have those records back in press again. You know, but so all these labels, whether it's Century Media or Nuclear Blast, but we still are choosing our own path just because we've been around. Like, don't get me wrong, we respect all those labels,
Hmm.
but for us, we know we still can sell records, but we also want to keep it to our audience, and not that we're against those labels, but we also just know that we want to choose our own path. We want to go our own route. We don't really want to follow anybody else's trends. Like that's kind of been our thing. Like if you notice with Hirax, we don't always take the easy path. We kind of go
Yeah.
outside of that. And it's just important to us. I think it's kind of our thing to the fans. They know where we're coming from, and also if it's going to get bigger, that's fine too. But we're not really worried about that. I mean, obviously, we want to pay the bills and be able to survive. I mean, touring is expensive. Like a lot of people don't realize how expensive it is, but touring is insane. You know,
It's
I mean,
about to
you
get
got
worse from what I hear. Like they're
yeah,
about to up all the visa fees and stuff like that.
yeah, it's more expensive now than it ever has been, but we still try to do
Excuse
it
me.
because you got to get out there to the fans. But I still love, like I said, back to the whole thing is that I still love doing this, but we're going to do it our way. And we're proud to be like that. Like, we don't want to just go along because a lot of the labels that do, they have a lot of power. They tell you what to
Hmm.
do, they tell you when to release your records. For us, we want to release records when we're ready to do it, you know?
Yeah, and I think honestly, metal's in a really good place right now. There's no more division between like genres and stuff. People generally are way more accepting of being like, oh, there's a thrash metal, a death metal, and a black metal band on this bill.
Yeah.
Cool. That's excellent. I want to hear all that stuff. And
Yeah.
I think that's great. I'm
It's,
glad it's like that now.
it's a great thing because if you look at the festivals, like especially in America, because
Hmm.
outside of America, the festivals are big and they do great. But America's starting to come along. Like you look at the Maryland Death Festival, the
Yeah.
Maryland Death Festival has risen over the years and it's becoming something incredible. Same with there's another one called the Milwaukee Metal Festival that's rising up, and then there's one called Hell's Heroes. You know, so you've
Okay.
got all these festivals that are starting to gain traction, which is amazing when you think of how America has not really been more of, I mean, there's underground metal fans everywhere, but it's not as big as say like Ozfest or any of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But it's definitely starting to happen, and I think for us it's bigger than it ever has been. If you look at the underground scene, that even these American festivals are starting to really, you know, pick up a lot of steam. They're starting to happen. So it can only get better. And but I think that the music has got this thing where it's just it has to still be from the heart, and you can't fool the fans. That's what I love about what we're doing. We're just keeping it real. We're not trying to do anything new metal. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not against that stuff, but we're gonna do it our way, and we're gonna do thrash metal. You know.
Yeah. So, what do you remember about like going into start to record this record and, like was it a did you have everything like written and ready to go? Were you still kind of writing as you were in the studio? Like what was that whole process like for that record?
All right. Well, I mean, because I know that there's some questions on here about earlier stuff too, but are we talking about either the New Age of Terror or are we talking about the brand new record?
Yeah, for the sorry, the New Age of Terror, my bad.
Okay, no worries, no worries. So that was an interesting time because I had, you know, already tested out the water. We had done some stuff before that, and then we started playing out. But we knew we needed a new record. The
Hmm.
thing about the new records, it always picks up interest. Like it, even for your old catalog, if you put out a new record, the old records will pick up steam and they'll start selling again too. Even if they've slowed down a bit, the new record always makes people go, "Hey, what about the other stuff?" You know,
Yep.
because especially if they like the new record, they'll go. I know they got some other records, or they'll even be at the record store and they'll see a few other records. So, we wanted to do a new record. This has been a big thing for me always to really go over the songs first, even
Mhm.
because I think it saves, well, not think, it saves a lot of money if you go into the studio really prepared.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the New Age of Terror is that we recorded it twice because the first time we hated the way it sounded and we went to a studio that wasn't that good. So what I would suggest to any musician, make sure the studio is pretty good. Like
Wow.
I know I'm an underground guy too. I mean, we even if you go back to some of the earlier stuff, we recorded those in some really bad places. But and some of it that's almost beautiful. Some of the recordings, even though they're old school, they still sound pretty awesome. But
Yeah.
to this point, when we did the New Age of Terror, we just knew that the first time we recorded it wasn't good enough.
Man.
There was a lot of overbleed, where we didn't have stuff, mic'd correctly, or there weren't places to really isolate the amps. There was drum overbleed. So we said, screw it. Even though we had spent money, let's re-record it. It was a little bit more expensive to record twice, but we did it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But the thing that was good about the first recording is that we got really good from that recording. So the next time we recorded, it was pretty quick, and we knew what we wanted to do. So it was almost like a rough draft the first time, and then
Yeah.
second time real smooth. And we also really like were prepared. So, and we went in with a great producer, and he was really kind of crazy and eccentric. So I'll never forget that recording. Like, when we would take breaks to go to the bathroom because, you're drinking coffee for hours in the studio. Some guys are drinking beer. That's their priority, whatever. Their what is it? Prerogative? Yeah,
Prerogative? Yeah.
prerogative. But, when you're drinking a lot of coffee, you got to go to the bathroom. So in this guy's bathroom, he had a wild bird, not in a cage. All right. So every time you would go to the bathroom, you go, make sure you close the door. So you're going to the bathroom with this bird flying around your head, and you're ducking and stuff because you're like, what? This is a wild ass bird. But he loved animals. The producer that we worked with, his name was Michael Rosen. So we had this wild bird through the whole sessions that we were there for days recording. But every time you go to the bathroom, you'd have to duck because this crazy ass bird would be trying to fly and hit your head and stuff. It was nuts. And this is
How do
something
you
that
even
people
feed it in there?
he would hand feed this thing. Somehow he got the bird to trust him, but it didn't trust anybody else that came into the bathroom. So it was like being attacked while you're trying to go to the bathroom. It is a funny story, but it's the truth. So that's one of
Yeah.
the things I'll never forget about the New Age of Terror was that this wild bird that he was nursing back to health. Because what happened, he found it in his backyard. I guess it was hurt, and so he started nursing it back to health. But the whole time he had it, the bathroom was its cage. But
Yeah.
so that's one of the things I'll never forget. But we were very prepared. We went through. I mean, we would go till like 4 in the morning on some of these sessions, and
Yeah.
we really put a lot of hard work into it, and it was a great record to do. I knew that some of the songs right away. We did a song called El Diablo Negro, which is now one of our live show staples. I knew
Mhm.
that record was going to be one of those songs just because it sounded so good in the studio. The title track, "The New Age of Terror," I could tell that was another one. It had a lot of power to it. There's a song on there called "Hostile Territory," which we still do live in the show. So you kind of have those moments, even the studio, where you're like, "Oh, that one's gonna be good," And so
Yeah.
that was one of those records that actually helped. It was like the rebirth, kind of like we had done some stuff before, but that record pretty much put us back on the map. You know and I'm so glad we did it. It was a really weird time, but after we did that record, we got really busy. We started touring a lot more. We got asked to come back to Germany. We were doing really big festivals, stuff that we had never done before. So it's like I
Yeah.
kind of get it now when I see younger bands that are all excited because when you play in front of whether it's 20,000 or 40,000 people, it changes your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's awesome that it picked right back up for you like that. Because I think, it could have gone the other way. People could have been like,
Yeah,
ah, who cares?
dude,
You know?
it was crazy. Immediately we were playing in Sweden and Germany. I mean, flying over and just like a whole new world to us. So yeah,
Yeah.
that record definitely helped a lot. And it was actually a great thing to re-record it. And I think everything matters when you record these records, even the vibe, like even that damn
Hmm.
bird in the bathroom.
Hmm.
Like everything makes the record intense, like, so it worked out cool. And he was a really great producer, Michael Ross, and he's still doing stuff, but he's gone on to some fame. So it's kind of cool when you work with people where each person kind of gains some notoriety just from making a good record together. With Phantasm, that's amazing you just brought that up. And for people that don't know, they probably should know a little information on that. That
Yeah.
project was me and Ron McGovney, who was the original bass player from Metallica, and Gene Hoglan from many bands, but he's probably now most known for Testament, maybe, and Death. Gene Hoglan's
Yeah.
Dark Angel. He played in a lot. Strapping Young Lad. I mean, what's that comic band? He did like a comic. What are they
Oh,
called?
like the Metalocalypse?
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
Gene's done so much stuff, but I've known him since even before he played drums. He used to write for fanzines. That's
Yeah.
pretty much how I met Gene, and he lived in Long Beach. And I remember going over his house when he was really young, and he was playing on pots and pans. And I even then I knew because he had pulled all the pans out of his mom and dad's kitchen, and he had them on the floor, and he was playing drums on that. I was like, man, this guy's got natural talent. He hadn't even taken drum lessons at that point.
Damn.
So I've known Gene a long time, but when we put the Phantasm thing together, Ron had been out of Metallica a couple of years, maybe a few, but he'd been out for a little bit. And I used to hang out with him because I've known Ron McGovney since he was in Metallica. I knew that band even before Dave Mustaine was in the band. I knew them. They had a
Wow.
guy named Lloyd Grant who played on the Metal Massacre track, "Hit the Lights." That was the first song they released. So I've known Ron a long time, and I was like, Ron, you got to play music again, man. What are you doing? He's like, I don't want to. Metallica kind of ripped his heart out. Like him and James Hetfield were basically like brothers. They lived together. When I first met Ron McGovney, him and James Hetfield were living in a small place in well, I think it was Bellflower or Norwalk. Those two places are right on the side. They're like on the line together. So
Okay.
probably Norwalk, but they lived in a house out there, and that's where they were practicing. And they had just gotten Lars Ulrich in the band, so I go way back with Ron, and I finally was able to talk him into doing a band, and we did a band called Phantasm in 1987. We did a 6-song demo with Bill Matoyer, but that style, that was kind of like the mix that I wanted to do with Hirax. Like I wanted Hirax to be a mix of what Hirax was doing and Phantasm. So that you noticed that about the Massacre of the Innocent track, that's kind of like right around that lines. But that wasn't really something I did on purpose. It's just I think it's always been in me that I wanted the music to get a little bit better technically, obviously, because we started out from very humble, three, 2.5, maybe even 1.5 minute songs,
Yeah.
and as you get better as a musician, you grow. And so I think the song structures will become more complex, but we did that kind of stuff in Phantasm for sure. And so Hyrax kind of has a bit of that as well. But that's a really good question. I've never been asked that before. But yeah, it kind of lends a little homage to Phantasm. But a lot of people don't know about Phantasm, even though that there's that records out there. It's really hard to get. It's not an easy record to find. But if you find it, there were only like 1,000 made. There was 1,000 CDs and 1,000 see-through clear vinyl. I'm proud of that record. Like if you've heard it or got it, man, you got something good there. And it was really cool to play with Gene because Gene was, I think at that point he was before he went to go play with Death, but
Mhm.
he was still in Dark Angel at that time. And it's also a piece of history. I mean, it's got Ron on there, it's got Gene on there, me. The crazy thing is that band actually at that time had Rocky George from Suicidal Tendencies. The only reason he's not on the recordings is because Mike Muir from Suicidal Tendencies, this is a bit of history,
Yeah.
told Rocky, you got to choose between Phantasm and Suicidal Tendencies, which we're like, dude, at that point, Suicidal Tendencies was way bigger than us. So we're like, we understand, go do that. And the record that they were recording, because that's why Mike Mira said you got to choose, because they were getting ready to record Join the Army. So Join the
Mm.
Army and the Phantasm were basically recorded at the same time, and Rocky couldn't be a part of it. But we did do some rehearsals with him, and it was amazing. I wish he would have been on the recording
Yeah.
because for a lot of people don't realize he's way underrated. That guy's like the Yngwie Malmsteen of, or the Uli John Roth of crossover music. He's an amazing guitar player.
So looking back on this record, 20 years now, I mean, how does it kind of feel knowing that people are still wanting to talk about it, and you're going into a whole new era of the band too, which we can work into that.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, it's amazing. And I also can't believe it's been 20 years. Like
Yeah,
that's how fast this stuff's starting to go by. Like, I mean, I always was tripping because next year for even our first album, Raging Violence, is going to be
40.
40 years.
Yeah.
But for the New Age of Terror to be 20 years old, it's crazy. I remember recording it twice like it was yesterday. We recorded first in Orange County, and then we didn't like that, and we went to LA. We went to Los Angeles, and we recorded out there, and it turned out great. I still love that record sonically too. Like if you look
Mhm.
back to when it was recorded, I think that might be around 2005, somewhere around there. Um, yeah, somewhere it's maybe 2004. Actually, 2004. It's crazy that it sounds like that because that was a while back, and sonically, it's really punchy and powerful. So it's a great record for me still to listen to, and it's kind of wild when you listen to a record like that for making the record. I still remember doing a lot of stuff in the studio, going out to the vocal box and singing and being instructed, hey, you're overpowering the mic or step back from the mic. So I remember all the different moments. And just finishing it, I think the last song we recorded was Unleash the Dogs of War, which is probably, I
Okay.
think, the longest track on the record. But it's got a great hook. It's kind of a epic track, but a lot of the stuff still hits me good. There's a song on there that I really love, which we never ever played. Well, I think we played it a few times live, but if I was to consider doing a track again off that record, there's a song called Suffer
Hmm.
that I really like. There's a lot of good moments on that record, a lot of good memories, and it helped us, like I said, get back to touring, and it took us to places. That's what's crazy. You can make a little record, and it can take you all around the world.
Yeah. So now, 20 years on from that, you're about to release a new record. We kind of mentioned this earlier, but right now there's like a 7-inch that's about to come out, but there is a record that's in the works.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Well, the 7 inch is kind of like a taster, you know.
yeah.
It's four of the tracks from the record, but the cool thing is I know people are gonna like it because it's a bunch of Hirax balled up into one. Like but it's also a fresh take because now there's every year there's better technology. There's
Yeah.
better ways of recording. Like even when I checked out the mic setup for the amps, just the way we mic the amps, and we recorded the drum tracks at one studio, and then we finished all the other parts, the vocals and the guitars and the bass, all that was done at a different studio. But it came out great. We were real smart about how we did it, so that way it wouldn't be too hard to send. Because now it's not where you send tapes, like you do downloads where they download the whole album and they can mix it in a different city or a different country. The
Yeah.
record's being mixed right now in Florida. It's halfway done, but the mixes that are going to be on the single, which these things are really important. It's kind of funny. The single's only going to be 500 copies, but it's amazing what 500 copies can do. And also, like you said, with the addition of the internet,
Hmm.
people are going to rip tracks, which is fine with us. We don't give a shit. Like, I know that over the years, a lot of bands complain about the internet and file sharing and all that stuff. But for us, it's actually a good thing because really where it pays off for us is to go on the road and tour anyways. I mean, we're going to sell some
Yeah.
records. In fact, we'll sell a lot more records than people realize. But where the real thing is happening is when you start touring and you go out there and earn it. You got to make your pay per night, and you sell your merchandise, at the stands and all that. But this record that's coming is I'm really proud of it. It was the hardest record I've ever made. Like out of all the records over the years, this record
Really?
was almost heartbreaking. Like to where I almost gave up twice.
Wow. What
Now,
brought that on?
yeah. Well, just first, it was really hard to record the drum tracks. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm going to give you this stuff because I think it's going to help a lot of other musicians, but like you got to fight through stuff sometimes. Like we recorded the drum tracks way more than I think we even needed to, but what it was is
Wow.
just getting them correctly preserved and saved. But usually when you're recording drums, you want to get the freshest tracks. You want to get that stuff before the drummer gets tired too, because when you're playing this fast, some of the DPMs we played at were super fast. And drummers are only human after a while. Like you
Yeah.
can kill your drummer. It literally you can kill your drummer. So our drummer worked his ass off, but we got the tracks, but we should have been trying to, get this stuff recorded like on the first 1 and 3, 1 and 3 takes, especially since we really had the material down. Like we did pre-production rehearsals massively before we even
Yeah.
went into the studio. Hardest record to make. So we got the drum tracks, but even that we had to wait because the producer went on a vacation. So when something's brand new, like a child being born,
Hmm.
that's what a record is to us. We had to wait like another week just to get the drum tracks before we could continue on with all the other tracks. And then finally, when I got the vocal tracks done, that was like the biggest relief. But that was a lot of work because these songs are pretty fast. So just
Yeah.
getting the timing, a lot of it's where the timing's got to be right because that's what makes the song even more powerful. If
Hmm.
it's off, with the punches, like say cymbal chokes and drum hits and guitar parts and stuff, you want the vocals right on. So we really did a lot of work to do that, and I was kind of a perfectionist, even though you can do a lot of there's a lot of editing you can do now with computers, but I still wanted to try to be as close to the mark as possible. And there's a lot of backing vocals that we haven't done as many on this record, more on this record than we've ever done before. So it was definitely a journey, but I know when I look back on it later, I'm going to be so proud that we saw it through because we could have gave up.
Yeah.
And even getting it mixed, that was probably the biggest frustrating part because we have time schedules because you've got to turn in these records, and we're doing all three formats. So we're doing cassette, vinyl, and CD. So there's a lot of work, different layouts, like the CD layout's different than the vinyl layout
Yeah.
and the cassette, layout. So we ended up switching producers. The guy that started the projects, Bill Matoyer, we worked with him on a bunch of great records. He's done a few Hirax records, but this
Uh,
was getting to the point to where we really needed to get it turned in. So we're doing also the 7 inch is kind of a tribute to him because we didn't want to just throw away his mixes, and a lot of fans love that shit. Like I know I do
mhm.
when I can get the first mixes of a record and then you get to hear the difference in the new mixes, and it's sometimes that's even more fun to like go, oh well, they did it like this, but this is the end result when they finally got the final mix. So it's the fans that get that 7 inch are getting something special, and I know that the pre-sale orders have been really great already. But I really think it's awesome that the fans get to hear it the way it was first done, and then they'll get the final mixes. And the final mixes are going to be brilliant because we have a legend doing it. And like I don't normally like to go by these press releases and waiting to announce it, but I have to on this guy. But when people
Yeah.
find out who's producing the album, and the album's 9 songs, we're doing the limited edition thing with 4 songs, but the 9 songs all together, when people get to hear it, it's for me it's a revelation because it's the journey I wanted the band to go on, and I think it's kind of a precursor to the future of what the band's going to be like. Even though we're always going to stay true to our thrash metal roots, this is like next level thrash metal from Hirax.
Yeah, like like an evolution, like
Yeah,
getting
that's
into that
that's the
next
best
era.
way I can look at it because also the time over 40 years, if you
Yeah.
don't know what you're doing by now, but it's definitely an evolution, and for us kind of a revolution because we're ready to get out there and play. Like after this record's release, we want to go out and start promoting the record by playing around the world. But I've known this guy for like 40 years, Bill Matoyer, and he's worked with a lot of great bands: Slayer, Savage Grace, Sacred Right, Municipal Waste, Sirithungo. I mean, the list is insane
Wow.
of the bands that this guy's worked with. But the time restraints were getting really tight, so we switched, and we're going to actually announce who the producer, the guy that's doing the album version, pretty soon, and I'll let you guys know. You'll be one of the first, but it's a legendary producer, so the time good on change because we got somebody that we all grew up on this guy's records, so it's like an honor. Besides, awesome to have this guy producing the record, but we got one of the best heavy metal producers in the world. So I can't wait to release the album.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I bet it feels good, after all this time, like, 40 years of being in the metal scene and, being a band. It's got to be like, 2024 and here we are doing another record.
Yeah, it's crazy because it like when you're younger, you never think about 20 years, even now
Yeah.
fast forward to 40 years. But
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm still doing it. I still love it. I still love traveling, and even the process of making records is pretty awesome because you get to see them from the ground up, like creating the songs, writing the concepts and the lyrics. And once the record's done, it's almost like 100% different than what you thought it was going to be. Not in a bad way, but in a good way. Like you get to see this whole thing become a monster.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so like especially on this new record, it took 10 years to get here because we haven't had a new record in 10 years, which is a long, way too long. But it's going to be worth the wait. So that's the bottom line is the quality matters more over than quantity.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, the album art, man. Who did that? It's sick. That like the dude in the
Yeah,
car and
yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Well, this is a great story because it's back to our original roots. Like we always want to kind of give back. I wouldn't even say kind of. We totally give back to the scene that we come from. We're very
Yeah.
proud of being an underground thrash metal band, even though some people wouldn't say that anymore because we've gotten in certain countries and certain cities we're pretty well known,
Hmm.
but we still like to look at it. We're an underground band. It's just I think we'll always be true to that. But during the pandemic, for the last 4 years, there was this artist, Thomas Pinheiro. That's how
Okay.
he's Portuguese. Well, it's a Portuguese pronunciation. He's from Brazil. But Thomas Pinheiro, he was this guy just drawing Hirax art, and he would just send it to us, and we would be blown away. We're like, this guy doesn't realize it, but he's uplifting our spirits, even in the worst time in the world during the pandemic. And it really did uplift our spirits because it was this guy who loved our music. He knew where we were coming from as a band, and he just started sending us artwork. And then, we had used some stuff for flyers when we were doing shows of his artwork, and he just kept sending stuff. And I'm like, we owe it to this guy to at least let him draw the next album cover because he's been doing
Yeah.
this for 4 years just as a fan. So I contacted him one day and said, hey, we'd like to actually hire you to do our album cover. And he was really surprised, but it's like, dude, he deserved it because he was being like an old school fan where he just did stuff because he wanted to do it. But
Yeah.
then I'm like, I want him to be a part of the band's history because I think he helped us get through the pandemic in a way. Like he was a guiding light. And so I started sending him the lyrics for some of the new
Mm.
songs, and he started drawing just from reading the lyrics. And so that's what Faster Than Death. I sent him the lyrics to Faster Than Death, and he came up with this car concept. And I was like, well, let me also send you some pictures of cars, because I love movies. Like, obviously, like if you look at it, there's a bit of a nod to like Mad Max and
Yeah.
Road Warrior. And I love all those cars from those movies. So I would send him some of that. And there's another movie called Death Wish
Hmm.
that I love, and I just sent him different photos. And so he came up with this character that's driving the car, and but then he got more elaborate with it. Like even on the 7 inch that's coming out, it's the view from the driver's perspective, so it's from inside the car looking out.
Yeah.
So it's all going to kind of factor into each other when people see the 7 inch to when the album comes out, because the album coming out is the full scene of the car driving down the road, just annihilating everything in its path.
Oh man,
But yeah,
that's
we
gonna be
we got
awesome.
it's the cover's been drawn by a real fan from Brazil, Thomas Pinheiro, and we're very proud of it. And I think it turned out great, especially when you consider that I just sent him the lyrics and he basically drew the album cover from reading the lyrics.
Yeah, he's talented. Like
Yeah.
everything in it is really awesome, and it fits the style of the band like perfectly. I was like,
Thank you.
man.
And I think when people hear the music with that, because what we're doing is we're going to make the record to where you can actually, it's like a book where it
Mhm.
gatefold open, just like the 7 inch, it's a gatefold too. We want people to be able to, when they get this record and they're at home and they sit down with it, to sit back with it like it's a book and read it and look at the artwork. That's what's great about the 12-inch vinyl, man. It's almost like its
Yeah.
own movie theater.
Yeah, I used to be like pretty hard into vinyl, and then around the pandemic, I just like needed money, and I was like, well, this is the first stuff that's got to go, unfortunately. But I still
I
keep a
know
few records.
No, I understand it. Anybody who collects records, and I'm one of those people too. Dude, I've
Hmm.
been through it. I sold my first record collection, my whole collection years ago. And the only reason I got back into record collecting, it wasn't because like now it's pretty popular. People are collecting
Yeah.
records. Not for me. I don't know, 20 years ago, I went to a swap meet and
Mhm.
I was thinking I just need some stuff to kind of decorate my house because I always want, rock photos up. So I bought a couple of records because they were cheap. They were like between $1 to like 25 cents. And it was just a swap meet. And this is before people were going crazy for vinyl again. And then
Yeah.
after I bought them and I put some covers up in my house, I was like, I think I'm going to go buy a cheap turntables. And that for me, I really got into it because it was cheap. And I love that about records. This is like I said before, now everybody's going crazy again. But I was buying pounds and stuff like for $20, I'd buy like 50 records at the swap meet.
And
If you could find that now, it would be great. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is I got into it because it was cheap. Um, but I do also know what it's like to sell them. I mean, I would do it again if it came down to that because I don't care what anybody says. Records are great, but when it comes down to life and
yeah.
eating and having a place to live in, the record's got to go if it comes to that point. And the good thing about record collecting though is it's almost like a safer bet than anything else because you can resell them. You're not going to get the exact money. It's there's a bit of a loss actually, but you're still going to get some money and it can take care of some stuff if you're dealing with whatever. And I can understand what you went through because dude,
Yeah.
I got rid of stuff that I'll never see again. I had an insane record collection because I bought most of this stuff when it first came out in the 70s and 80s. So, but I don't think it's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, the thing that's great, you probably bought some stuff that you could actually resell, and that's a good thing, you know.
My only one regret with that, I don't know how familiar you are with like current era bands. Do you know the band Black Dahlia Murder?
Yeah, yeah, totally. We actually did some shows with them in Europe, and they were
Okay.
fucking amazing, and they were
Yeah.
great people, really great people.
So I had their entire discography and I had met them through like touring and stuff like that, and I had everything signed.
Wow.
And then Trevor passed, and I sold them during the pandemic because they were worth quite a bit of money. And I was like, well, I
Yeah,
need this for rent, like you were saying. And
yeah,
then Trevor passes away a couple years or last year, or it's been 2 years now.
something like that. Yeah,
Anyways, yeah, he passed away, and it's like, why the fuck did I sell those? Like,
yeah.
but who
But
could have known? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's the case. And to be honest with you, dude, life is crazy. You what I love though, this is the try to use this as some theory on this.
mhm,
Really, music's more about knowledge than what your collection looks like.
yeah,
If it's in your head, that's way bigger than anything else, dude. Like for me, even if without the records, I still know the songs. I still know which record I would go listen to. If I'm gonna go on any streaming service, I can rock the fuck out just by going on a streaming service because I got all
yeah,
that knowledge up here. The records, that's just material things. And the only thing I think sucks about a lot of it now, a lot of it's kind of a popularity contest, and I never was
hmm,
into that, whether it was music or anything. I buy stuff that I like, and I think that's the problem now is a lot of people are just buying stuff to be collectors or to post it on Facebook or Instagram and do whatever makes you happy. But I think at the same time be realistic. And there's a lot of people that are buying records that they probably should be buying food or paying their rent. Like
yeah,
it can be, it's almost an addiction. I mean, even myself, I had to police myself on record collecting because you can get carried away with it. You can go
oh,
every day if you want.
100%. Yeah,
It's just the truth, and I think that's the problem with a lot of collectors. They're addicted to it, man, and it's like, no, I think you need to spend time learning the records. Like, you don't need to buy so many records. I mean, a lot of people don't even get around to listening to all those records they buy. They just have them sitting
right.
around. Like, do they really know the material on those records?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. At least I can say that, I had like more than like a surface level connection with them. So it was like, the music means more to me than having the physical item. So
Oh,
I agree with that 100%.
totally. It's like I said, it's about knowledge. Like I know a lot of kids that have money to buy records, but their knowledge sucks. Like knowledge is still the most important thing in music. Whatever style of music it is, it don't matter if you don't have the knowledge.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the last thing here, whatever you can talk about. I know you mentioned you can't reveal everything, but as far as
Yeah.
like the 7-inch, when does that release and where can people go find it? Those
Yeah.
listening and watching.
Yeah, Doomenia, like Doom Mania.
Mhm.
uh I'm probably butchering the name too, because everybody, like I said, like even when you were asking me about my name, it's in Czech Republic, so who knows how they say it over there, and you know, but it's any of our websites, if you go on there and you find the new 7-inch release, because we've been posting that, I'll probably post it right after I get done with this interview. No,
Yeah.
not probably, I will. But the thing is, you go there, you find the link to it'll say about the new 7-inch. There's 500 copies made, 250 on yellow, 250 on red. Even I, believe it or not, I don't always listen to my own records, but this is definitely one of those records that I want. And it's the company's out of Czech Republic. They're selling them, and from what I hear, it's a great price. Like even with all the pricing going up, I just think that these guys are badass underground guys who know how to mail shit out. So they're probably doing it at uh, media mail, which is actually the cheapest way you can mail stuff, but it's still,
Yep.
you still get a confirmation number. So that's why, even here's a good one for all the fans watching and listening. If you're going to mail stuff, especially if it's something like a CD or a DVD or a vinyl, mail it media, because it's way cheaper. Like, don't send it first class or priority unless you really have to. But media, you get a tracking number. So you
Mhm.
should be good. But anyway, so they're selling these singles for a totally awesome price, which I care about. So I don't want them, I don't want our records being insanely priced. I get it. Like, records aren't cheap anymore. That's another thing about collecting records. If you're buying brand new records, really take your time and make sure it's something you want, because they're not cheap anymore. It's not like in the old days where you could spend $50 and get like 7 records. It's
Yep.
way different nowadays. So the new single is on Domenia. It's called Faster Than Death, but it's like the 4-track EP, and it's going to be limited because we have the album for Faster Than Death, which is 9 tracks. That's going to be coming out shortly after that. Um, when people hear the mix, even the mix that Bill Matoyer did on the 4 tracks is great. It's really good. But there is a big difference between his mix and the guy that we have doing the album, which we're going to announce that pretty soon. And then basically after that record comes out, it comes out August 1st, the EP.
Okay.
Uh, they're shipping, like they did pre-orders, and I know that they're shipping them into the United States and Canada and other countries like Japan. Um, but it comes out August 1st, when we start the tour in Germany, Dortmund, Germany. We start the tour. Us and Exodus are starting together, which is great. And then the second show will be at Wacken Open Air.
Oh,
And
damn.
so
That's gonna be
it's
great.
yeah. And so it's about a 3-week tour, and then we'll get back to the States, and then the following month or two we start doing some shows with Sodom. Sodom and us will be doing New York together and San Francisco together. And so there's more announcements coming, but I appreciate the support. I totally appreciate the fans that care and love this kind of music. And I'm still standing, and I'm gonna keep doing this shit till the day I die.
I love it. Yeah. Katon, man, thank you so much for taking me down the history of everything, man. It's been great, and I'm glad that you were able to like, remember a lot of that stuff too, as long as you've been doing this. So it was
Yeah,
awesome, man.
I think that it's important to do these interviews too, especially while my memory's still pretty fresh. I'm not ancient, but I am getting
No,
up
I
there.
know.
And some of it, if you don't tell people these stories, like I was saying before, the history will be lost. And there's just a lot of great history from the early 80s until now. Like, that's what's great
Yeah.
when you think about it. Over 4 decades, this stuff's been going on. And so thank you for the support. And I want to also say thank you to your fans that are going to be watching and listening to this. And we'll be seeing you. The band's going to be doing a lot in the next, not just this year, but next year too. So the next couple of years will be very busy.
Nice. That's awesome, man. I'm so glad that like things are like moving forward again and like you're entering a new era for the band. It's
Thank
awesome.
you, man. Appreciate the support.
Yeah, yeah.